By midday, Alpha King Torin Blackmore had lost all patience. The throne room felt unbearably crowded. Generals lined the walls in polished armor. Advisors occupied every council seat. Royal guards stood motionless beside towering marble pillars, and kneeling in the center of the room sat yet another line of prisoners captured during recent border raids. The hearings had begun before sunrise. Hours later, they still weren't finished. Torin rubbed his temple. His head ached. His shoulders ached. Even his wolf seemed irritated. The kingdom's eastern border had suffered months of unrest. Bandits, raiders, smugglers, spies. Every week brought another problem demanding royal attention. Normally, Torin preferred reviewing cases personally. Justice mattered. Accuracy mattered. But after 6 straight hours of questioning prisoners, even his discipline was beginning to wear thin. The latest captive knelt trembling before the throne, a young man accused of smuggling weapons. Torin listened to the evidence, considered the testimony, then issued a sentence. The guards escorted the prisoner away. Immediately, another replaced him, and another, and another. The cycle felt endless. By the time the final case arrived, the entire room was exhausted. Even the royal scribes looked ready to collapse. The massive throne room doors opened once more. Chains rattled across the stone floor. Several guards entered, escorting one final prisoner. Unlike the others, this captive looked different, smaller, quieter, wrapped in a torn gray travel cloak. Heavy iron chains bound both wrists. Most unusual of all, an iron mask completely concealed the prisoner's face. The metal covered everything except the eyes. Even those remained lowered toward the floor. The sight drew a few curious glances from the council. Torin barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the stack of reports waiting beside his throne. The lead commander stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty." Torin nodded impatiently. "Proceed." The commander cleared his throat. "This prisoner was captured near the eastern border 3 days ago." Torin glanced up briefly. For less than a second, long enough to see chains, an iron mask, a thin frame. Nothing remarkable, nothing urgent, nothing that justified delaying the proceedings. "Identity?" Torin asked. "We're uncertain." That answer immediately annoyed him. Weeks of investigation, and they still didn't know who the prisoner was. Wonderful. "Charges?" The commander hesitated. "We suspect espionage, but no evidence has been confirmed." Torin exhaled sharply. The room waited. Everyone knew what that hesitation meant. Another uncertain case, another mystery, another problem demanding time he didn't have. His patience finally snapped. "Send the prisoner south with the labor transports." Several advisors exchanged glances. The commander frowned. "Your Majesty, I've heard enough." Torin waved a dismissive hand. The gesture ended countless discussions. This one was no different. "If evidence emerges later, we'll revisit the case." A pause. "For now, remove her." The commander reluctantly bowed. "As you command." The guards immediately turned the prisoner toward the doors. The masked woman offered no resistance, no protest, no plea for mercy, nothing. She simply lowered her head, as though she expected exactly this outcome. For some reason, that should have bothered Torin. It didn't. Not then, because he never truly looked at her. The prisoner took several slow steps toward the exit. Chains scraped against stone. The throne room resumed moving. Advisors returned to conversations. Scribes gathered documents. The day's work was finally ending. Then fate intervened. One chain caught between 2 uneven stones in the floor. The prisoner stumbled. A guard grabbed her arm roughly. Another cursed. Metal shifted, just slightly. The iron mask moved a fraction of an inch, only a glimpse, a narrow sliver of skin exposed beneath the edge of the metal. Nothing more. Most people never noticed. One man did. An elderly royal advisor sitting near the front row suddenly went completely pale. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. Then, to the shock of the entire throne room, he shot to his feet so fast his chair crashed backward. The sound echoed through the hall. Every conversation stopped. The old advisor pointed toward the prisoner with a trembling hand and shouted a single word. "Stop!" The throne room fell silent. The throne room became so quiet that everyone could hear the fallen chair still rocking against the marble floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The guards froze, mid-step. The prisoner remained standing near the doorway, and Alpha King Torrin Blackmore stared at his oldest advisor in complete confusion. Lord Cedric Valewood was 82 years old, a veteran of 2 wars, a former royal strategist, one of the few men in the kingdom who seemed incapable of panic. In 20 years, Torrin had seen him remain calm during assassinations, military invasions, and palace fires. Now, the old man's face looked as white as snow. That alone made the situation serious. "Cedric?" Torrin rose slowly from his throne. The advisor never took his eyes off the prisoner. "Remove the mask." The command echoed through the hall. Several guards exchanged uncertain glances. The lead commander frowned. "My lord, remove it." Cedric took a step forward. His voice shook, not with weakness, with urgency. Immediately, a strange tension spread through the room. The prisoner stiffened. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Torrin's eyes narrowed. For the first time all day, his full attention settled on the masked woman. Interesting. The king descended the steps of the throne. Slowly, carefully. The prisoner immediately lowered her head further, as though trying to disappear. The gesture only increased everyone's curiosity. Torrin stopped several feet away. "Why are you wearing the mask?" No answer. The silence lingered. The king studied her more carefully. She looked exhausted, thin. Her cloak hung loosely from her frame. Years of imprisonment seemed etched into every movement. Yet, despite her condition, something felt unusual, not dangerous, hidden. The sensation irritated him. Torrin disliked mysteries, especially one standing directly in front of him. "What is your name?" he asked. The prisoner remained silent. One guard tightened his grip on her arm. Another reached toward the iron mask. Instantly, she recoiled. The reaction shocked everyone. It was the first emotion she had displayed. Fear. Genuine fear. "Don't." Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. Yet every person in the room heard it. The words carried desperation. Not anger. Not defiance. Terror. Cedric stepped forward again. His expression softened slightly. "What is your name, child?" The prisoner hesitated. For several seconds, she seemed to debate whether answering mattered. Eventually, she spoke. "Isolde." The name drifted through the room. No one reacted, because it meant nothing, at least initially. Torrin searched his memory. No noble house carried that name. No political records mentioned it. Nothing. Just a simple name, belonging to an anonymous prisoner. Yet, Cedric's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more concerned. The old advisor took another step closer, his gaze fixed on the edge of the iron mask. "What are they hiding?" The question wasn't directed at Isolde. It was directed at fate itself. Torrin frowned. The entire situation had become absurd. One glimpse of skin had transformed a routine sentencing into a royal emergency. Enough. The king's patience finally returned. Not because he was calm, Because he needed answers. Remove the mask. This time, the command came from the throne. No one questioned it. The guards moved immediately. Isolde backed away. Panic flashed across her eyes. No, the single word cracked, as though she had spoken it many times before, and nobody had ever listened. One guard grabbed the back of the iron restraints. Another reached toward the locking mechanism. The prisoner struggled, weakly, not because she lacked determination, because years of captivity had left little strength behind. The metal latch clicked. A sharp sound, small, final. The entire throne room held its breath. Slowly the guard lifted the mask away. Torin expected scars. Perhaps disfigurement. Some physical feature worth hiding. What he saw instead made him stop moving. Stop thinking. Stop breathing. A silver marking stretched elegantly across the left side of her face, beginning near her cheekbone, curving upward toward her temple. The lines shimmered faintly beneath the sunlight pouring through the palace windows. Ancient, beautiful, impossible. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, shocked cries. A noblewoman nearly fainted. Several council members immediately dropped to one knee. One royal scholar crossed himself. Another began whispering prayers. Torin stood frozen, because he recognized it. Everyone did. Every child in the kingdom learned the old legends. The mooncrest mark, a sacred symbol believed extinct for nearly 400 years. A mark carried only by the legendary mates of ancient Alpha Kings. And somehow, the mark wasn't appearing in a prophecy, or an ancient painting, or a forgotten manuscript. It was carved across the face of a chained prisoner standing in his throne room. And suddenly, the woman he almost sent away had become the most important person in the kingdom. The throne room exploded into noise. Questions erupted from every direction. What does this mean? Is it real? Impossible. The Mooncrest bloodline died centuries ago. Nobles stood from their seats. Council members shouted over one another. Royal scholars looked moments away from fainting. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of the chaos remained completely silent. Isolde lowered her eyes, as though she had witnessed this reaction before. That detail unsettled Torin more than the mark itself, because everyone else was shocked. She wasn't. The Alpha King stepped forward. His presence alone quieted half the room. When that failed to silence the rest, he slammed a fist against the arm of his throne. The crack echoed through the chamber. Instant silence followed. Good. At least some things still worked. Torin's gaze swept across the room. No one speaks. The command carried the full weight of the throne. Every noble immediately obeyed. Then he turned toward Isolde. For the first time, he truly looked at her. Not as a prisoner, not as a problem, as a person. She appeared younger than he originally assumed. Perhaps 25, maybe a little older. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders, where the mask had once concealed it. Her face was pale, not naturally pale, the pale of someone who spent years indoors, years without sunlight, years without freedom, and despite everything happening around her, she looked exhausted, not frightened, exhausted, as though she no longer possessed the energy to care what happened next. The realization made something tighten inside his chest. Torin pushed the feeling aside. Questions first, emotions later. He turned toward Cedric. You recognized it immediately. The elderly advisor nodded. His eyes never left the silver mark. I prayed I was mistaken. You weren't. No. Cedric's voice sounded strangely hollow. I wasn't. A royal historian rose cautiously from his seat. Your Majesty, if I may. Torin nodded. The scholar swallowed hard. The moon crest mark appears throughout the oldest royal records. He gestured toward Isolde. Ancient texts describe it as the sacred sign carried by fated mates chosen by the moon goddess herself. Several nobles shifted uneasily. The old stories remained controversial. Some believed them completely. Others considered them little more than myths. Torin belonged firmly in the second category. Until today, the historian continued. Every recorded mooncrest bearer altered the course of the kingdom. The room remained silent, listening. Some became queens, a pause. Others prevented wars, another pause. Several changed royal succession itself. That final statement sent visible tension through the council, because succession was power, and power made people nervous, especially powerful people. Torin understood the concern immediately. If the legends held even a fraction of truth, Isolde represented more than an ancient curiosity. She represented uncertainty, the kind nobles hated most. His gaze returned to the woman. She still hadn't spoken, hadn't defended herself, hadn't demanded anything. Interesting. Most people would have immediately used the revelation to improve their circumstances. Isolde seemed almost disappointed, as though the mark had ruined something. The thought lingered. Strange. Then Torin noticed something else. The scars. Now that the mask was gone, faint marks lined her wrists. Old restraints, years old, some barely healed, others permanent. The sight darkened his expression. No prisoner acquired injuries like that during a simple transport. Those scars told a story, and he intended to hear it. Immediately, the Alpha King straightened, then issued the most important command of the day. Clear the throne room. The nobles blinked. Several looked disappointed. Others looked relieved. No one argued. When Torin made up his mind, arguing rarely ended well. One by one, council members filed toward the exits. Guards escorted the remaining prisoners away. The massive chamber gradually emptied. Soon only a handful remained. Torin, Cedric, 2 trusted advisors, several royal guards, and Isolde, the woman wearing a mark that should not exist, the woman he nearly sent to a labor camp without a second glance. The realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. If that chain hadn't caught the floor, if the mask hadn't shifted, if Cedric hadn't noticed, he would never have known. The thought lingered unpleasantly, because something deep inside him whispered a dangerous possibility. Perhaps fate had intervened, and, for the first time in his life, Alpha King Torin Blackmore wasn't entirely certain fate had made a mistake. The throne room felt much smaller after everyone left. Only a handful remained. Alpha King Torin sat at the base of the throne instead of upon it. Across from him sat Isolde. For the first time since arriving, she was no longer wearing chains, yet she still looked like a prisoner. Years of captivity lingered in her posture, in the way she kept her hands folded, in the way she watched every door, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. Torin noticed all of it. "What is the mooncrest mark?" he asked. Isolde gave a tired laugh. "You should ask what it cost me." The answer surprised him. Most people would have celebrated such a revelation. She sounded bitter. After a long silence, she finally began speaking. "When I was 14, the mark appeared." Her fingers touched the silver pattern on her cheek. "My family panicked." Cedric frowned. "Why?" "Because of the prophecy." Torin leaned forward. "What prophecy?" Isolde looked directly at him. "The one that says a mooncrest bearer can change the royal bloodline." The room became quiet. That explained everything. Succession determined power. Power made people dangerous. My father believed powerful nobles would come for me. A sad smile appeared. He was right. Years later, a noble family discovered the mark. At first, they offered protection, promises, security, safety. Then they realized something. A living mooncrest bearer could threaten carefully arranged inheritance plans, political marriages, future heirs, existing alliances. So they made a different decision. They locked me away. Torin's jaw tightened. For how long? 12 years. The answer struck like a blow. Even Cedric looked horrified. Isolde continued quietly. They moved me from estate to estate. Her voice remained calm, too calm. They burned records, destroyed documents, paid officials, erased my existence. Every sentence made the room colder. Torin stared at her. 12 years, an entire life stolen. Not because of a crime, not because of treason, because someone feared a possibility. How did you end up near the border? One corner of her mouth lifted, the closest thing to amusement he'd seen all day. The nobles transporting me were attacked. By raiders. Torin blinked. The border raiders? She nodded. They thought I was a hostage worth ransom. A pause. They accidentally rescued me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The irony was almost unbelievable. Criminals had unknowingly freed a prisoner. Then royal soldiers captured her and delivered her directly to the throne. Fate, indeed. Torin exhaled slowly. The situation was worse than he imagined. Because if powerful nobles hid Isolde for 12 years, they would not simply accept her reappearance. They would try to silence her. Again, the realization settled heavily inside the room. For the first time, Torin understood something important. The greatest danger facing Isolde wasn't her past. It was the people who created it. And somewhere, inside the kingdom, those people were already learning she was alive. Torin assigned Isolde rooms inside the royal residence that same evening. Not prison quarters, not guest chambers. Protected royal suites guarded day and night. The decision immediately sparked rumors throughout the palace. Torin ignored them. His concern wasn't gossip. It was survival. If Isolde's story was true, powerful enemies were already moving against her. The safest place in the kingdom was under his roof. At least, that was what he told himself. Over the following week, he met with her often. At first, the meetings focused on information. Names, dates, locations. Anything that could identify the nobles responsible for her imprisonment. Yet the more they spoke, the more difficult it became to view her as merely a witness. Isolde possessed a sharp mind. She remembered details others would have forgotten, patterns, conversations, political connections. She understood the kingdom surprisingly well, for someone who had spent years hidden away. One afternoon, Torin finally asked the question that had been bothering him. How did you survive it? Isolde looked up from the book she was reading. 12 years. He nodded. Most people would have broken, become angry, bitter, cruel. Instead, she remained calm, thoughtful, steady. For a moment, she considered the question, then shrugged lightly. I didn't have another choice. The simplicity of the answer unsettled him. As though survival itself had become routine, Torin found himself studying her. The way she spoke, the way she listened, the quiet strength beneath her exhaustion. And then his wolf noticed something. At first, it was only a feeling, a strange awareness whenever she entered a room, a sense of recognition, of familiarity. Torin tried ignoring it. His wolf refused. The next meeting made it worse. Then, worse again. By the end of the week, the beast inside him had become unbearable. Mate. The word appeared suddenly, clear, certain. Torin nearly dropped the report he was reading. No, Impossible. His wolf disagreed. Mate. Again. Louder. Stronger. Every instinct inside him awakened at once. Protect her. Stay close. Keep her safe. The reaction was so intense that Torin abruptly stood and walked toward the nearest window. He needed distance, fresh air, anything. Behind him, Isolde raised an eyebrow. You seem distracted. Torin cleared his throat. I'm fine. A terrible lie. She seemed unconvinced. Unfortunately, his wolf chose that exact moment to repeat itself. Mate. Torin closed his eyes briefly. Wonderful. Years of ignoring stories about fated mates. And now, destiny apparently wanted revenge. When he finally turned around, Isolde was watching him carefully. Not suspiciously, knowingly. The realization stopped him cold. She had noticed. Of course she had. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Isolde closed her book. Her expression became strangely sad, as though she had experienced this moment before. Do you feel it too? The question landed softly. Yet it echoed through the room. Torin stared at her, because she didn't sound hopeful. She didn't sound excited. She sounded tired, as if fate had spent years disappointing her. And suddenly, the Alpha King realized the greatest challenge ahead wasn't convincing himself she mattered. It was convincing her that she did. Torin didn't answer immediately. The question lingered between them. Do you feel it too? Most wolves dreamed of finding their fated mate. Songs were written about it. Legends celebrated it. Yet, standing before Isolde, Torin discovered the reality was far more complicated, because the sadness in her eyes worried him more than the question itself. Finally, he nodded. Yes. The answer was simple, honest, and somehow it made her look even more tired. Isolde lowered her gaze. I thought so. Torin frowned. That's not the reaction I expected. A faint smile touched her lips. Most people expect excitement. And you don't? She looked toward the palace window. For a long moment, she remained silent. Then she spoke. I spent 12 years being treated like a prophecy. The words landed heavily. A symbol, a political threat, a future someone feared. Her fingers brushed the silver mark on her cheek. Nobody cared who I was. Torin understood immediately. The mooncrest mark had shaped her entire life. Not because she wanted it to, because everyone else decided it should. So now, she continued softly, I'm careful. The Alpha King leaned back in his chair. Careful. Not bitter, not angry, just careful. The distinction mattered. Over the following weeks, their conversations changed. Less politics, more honesty. Torin learned that Isolde loved history, that she secretly collected old stories, that she preferred rainy days over sunny ones, that she could defeat most royal scholars in debates without raising her voice. The more he learned, the less he thought about the mark, and the more he thought about her. One evening, they walked through the palace gardens. Spring had begun transforming the kingdom. Flowers bloomed. Fountains flowed again. The world felt alive. For the first time since arriving, Isolde seemed relaxed. Not completely, but enough. You know, Torin said. You're nothing like I expected. She laughed softly. Neither are you. The answer surprised him. Really? She nodded. The stories make you sound terrifying. Torin smiled. Good. Then I met you. And a mischievous look appeared in her eyes. You worry too much. The Alpha King actually laughed. A rare occurrence. One he noticed she seemed pleased by. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then, footsteps interrupted the peace. Commander Rylan approached quickly. Too quickly. Torin recognized the expression immediately. Trouble. The commander bowed. Your Majesty. What happened? Rylan's face hardened. "We arrested a messenger leaving the capital." Torin's smile vanished. "And?" The commander handed him a folded letter. The king opened it. His expression darkened immediately. The message contained only a few lines, but they were enough. Someone had offered a substantial reward for information regarding Isolde's movements. Someone powerful, someone desperate, someone afraid. Torin folded the letter carefully, then looked toward the palace. His instincts sharpened, because this wasn't gossip anymore. It wasn't politics. It was preparation. The people who imprisoned Isolde for 12 years had finally realized she wasn't disappearing again, and they were beginning to fight back. The first assassination attempt happened 3 days later. A servant, carrying wine, entered Isolde's chambers shortly before dinner. Nothing seemed unusual until one of the palace guards recognized him. The man had never worked in the royal residence. By the time guards moved to stop him, he was already reaching for a hidden dagger. The assassin never made it through the doorway. He died before answering a single question. The incident shook the palace. It infuriated Torin, because it confirmed his fears. Someone wanted Isolde dead, desperately. The Alpha King immediately doubled security around her quarters. Additional guards were assigned. Visitor access was restricted. Every servant underwent new background checks. To many people, the precautions seemed excessive. Torin disagreed. The first attempt proved the threat was real. The second attempt proved it was organized. A week later, royal guards intercepted a courier leaving the capital. Hidden inside his belongings were maps, schedules, guard rotations, information that should never have left palace walls. The discovery exposed something far worse than a lone assassin. The conspiracy had allies inside the kingdom, possibly inside the court itself. That realization disturbed everyone, especially Torin. Meanwhile, Isolde remained surprisingly calm, almost too calm. One evening, while reviewing reports, Torin finally asked her about it. "Aren't you frightened?" She considered the question, then shook her head. "I spent 12 years waiting for people to decide my future." A small shrug followed. "I don't intend to spend the rest of my life doing the same." The answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Because it wasn't bravery. Not exactly. It was determination. The kind built through suffering. The kind that survived because it had no alternative. As weeks passed, the kingdom slowly learned the truth about Isolde. Rumors spread first, then facts. Stories of the hidden Mooncrest bearer reached villages and noble estates alike. Public sympathy grew quickly. Unfortunately, so did panic among the guilty. The nobles responsible for hiding her understood something dangerous. The longer Isolde remained alive, the harder it became to control the narrative. Witnesses started speaking. Old records resurfaced. Former servants came forward. The conspiracy was unraveling, and desperate people made reckless decisions. The third attempt came during the spring renewal banquet. Hundreds of nobles filled the palace ballroom. Music echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere felt almost normal. Torin hated it immediately. His instincts refused to settle. Something felt wrong. Across the room, Isolde stood speaking with several guests. She looked happier than he had seen her in months. The sight eased some of his tension. Then, movement caught his eye. A servant. Too fast. Too focused. The man pushed through the crowd with a purpose that didn't belong. Torin reacted instantly. "Isolde!" His shout echoed through the ballroom. Heads turned. Confusion spread. And then the assassin struck. Steel flashed beneath the chandelier light. The crowd screamed. Guards surged forward, but they were a second too late. The blade reached Isolde first, and as chaos erupted around them, Torin realized with horror that the conspiracy had finally stopped hiding. Time seemed to stop. Torin saw the blade, saw the assassin, saw Isolde turn at the sound of her name. Then everything happened at once. The knife struck her shoulder instead of her heart. A lucky accident, or perhaps a miracle. The force spun her sideways. The ballroom erupted into panic. Guests screamed. Guards rushed forward. The assassin never escaped. Torin's wolf exploded with fury. Mate. The word thundered through his mind. Protect. 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 For one terrifying moment, instinct nearly overwhelmed reason. The Alpha King crossed the distance between them in seconds. He caught Isolde before she hit the floor. Blood stained her gown. Too much blood. Far too much. Isolde. Her eyes fluttered open. I'm fine. The obvious lie would have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it terrified him, because her voice sounded weak. The assassin had used poison. The royal healers confirmed it minutes later. The wound itself wasn't fatal. The toxin was. Panic spread through the palace. Healers rushed in and out of the royal infirmary. Advisors waited anxiously. Guards searched the city for anyone connected to the attack. Through it all, Torin remained beside her bed, hour after hour, night after night, refusing to leave. The kingdom could wait. Isolde couldn't. The second night proved the hardest. Her fever worsened. The poison fought every treatment. Several healers privately prepared for the worst. Torin overheard them. The conversation nearly shattered him, because for the first time, he understood exactly how close he had come to losing her. Not the Mooncrest bearer, not the prophecy, not the kingdom's political mystery. Her, the woman who debated historians for fun, the woman who preferred rainy days, the woman who had survived 12 years of captivity without surrendering her kindness, the woman who somehow made him laugh when nobody else could. The realization hit with brutal clarity. He loved her, not because fate demanded it, not because a sacred mark existed, because she was Isolde, and the thought of a world without her suddenly felt unbearable. Near dawn on the third day, her condition finally changed. The fever broke. The poison began weakening. For the first time, hope returned. Hours later, Isolde opened her eyes. Torin was still there, exactly where she had left him. A faint smile appeared. You look terrible. Relief hit him so hard, he nearly laughed. Instead, he lowered his head briefly, a gesture nobody else would have understood, but she did. You were worried. The statement was gentle, certain. Torin met her gaze. Terrified, the honesty surprised both of them. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Comfortable silence. Then Isolde reached for his hand, and he realized something else. If that chain hadn't caught the throne room floor, if the mask hadn't shifted, if Cedric hadn't spoken, he would have sent her away, never learning her name, never knowing her story, never discovering the woman who had become the most important person in his life. The thought haunted him, because fate had given him one chance, just one, and he had almost thrown it away. The conspiracy collapsed within a month. Once Isolde survived the assassination attempt, the people behind it began making mistakes. Fear did that. It turned careful plans into desperate decisions. Royal investigators followed money trails, intercepted messages, questioned servants, merchants, and former guards. One arrest led to another, then another. Soon, the entire network began unraveling. Names emerged, powerful names. Noble families once considered untouchable Men and women who spent years hiding behind wealth and influence. None of it protected them now. The evidence was overwhelming. Records proving illegal imprisonment, payments to corrupt officials, orders authorizing assassinations. Witnesses who had finally stopped being afraid. For the first time in 12 years, the truth stood in sunlight, and it refused to disappear. The trials lasted weeks. The verdicts were swift. Titles were stripped, estates seized, fortunes confiscated. Those responsible lost everything they spent years protecting. Meanwhile, Isolde gained something she had never truly possessed. Her name, her life, her future. The kingdom officially restored every record that had been erased. Her existence was acknowledged publicly. The story spread quickly, not just because of the mooncrest mark, because people admired the woman who survived despite everything, the woman who refused to let captivity define her. One spring afternoon, Torin stood beside her on a palace balcony overlooking the capital. Below, the city bustled with life. Merchants filled the streets. Children played near fountains. Bells echoed from distant towers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence felt peaceful, earned. Finally, Isolde glanced toward him. "Do you ever think about that day?" Torin smiled slightly. "The throne room?" She nodded. "The day you almost sent me away." The king laughed softly. "More often than I'd like." It was true. The memory returned frequently. The masked prisoner. The careless dismissal. The wave of his hand. 5 seconds. That was all the attention he gave her. 5 seconds. The thought still unsettled him. Isolde leaned against the balcony railing. "The mark wasn't what saved me." Torin looked at her. "No." She shook her head. "The mark only made people stop and look." A small smile appeared. What happened afterward mattered more. The words stayed with him, because they were true. The mooncrest mark was extraordinary, ancient, rare, legendary. But it wasn't why he stayed beside her. It wasn't why he admired her. And it certainly wasn't why he loved her. The mark had only introduced them. Everything else belonged to Isolde. Her courage, her intelligence, her resilience, her heart. Years later, historians would tell the story incorrectly. They would speak of prophecies, sacred symbols, royal destiny. Those things made for better legends. But Torin knew the truth. The most important part of the story was never the mark. It was the woman wearing it. Sometimes destiny didn't arrive wearing a crown. Sometimes it arrived in chains. And if you weren't paying attention, you might miss it entirely. Torin almost did. A single careless decision nearly sent Isolde out of his life before it ever truly began. Instead, fate gave him a second chance. One he never intended to waste. Standing beside the woman he nearly dismissed, the Alpha King finally understood the lesson that would follow him forever. The face behind the mask mattered far more than the mark upon it.